She found the little girl at 11:41 at night, sitting alone on the back step of the diner in the rain. And the thing that stopped Sadie cold was not that the child was crying. It was that she was not. 7 years old, soaking wet shoes with cartoon cats bleeding color onto the wet concrete. And she was sitting perfectly still and with her hands folded like someone who had learned a long time ago that stillness was safer than sound. Sadie knew that kind of stillness. She had worn it herself for most of her childhood. The name on her name tag said Sadie. It had said that for 3 years, through 4 uniform shirts worn thin at the collar, through 2 pairs of non-slip shoes that had eventually slipped anyway on the wet tile near the coffee station, through more double shifts and missed rent payments and cold suppers, eaten standing over a break room sink than she had ever bothered to count. The name was not the one she had been born with. She did not think about that often. There was rarely time. The Silver Wheel Diner sat on the south edge of Medford, Oregon, at the point where Highway 62 flattened out and gave up trying to be scenic. It was the kind of place that existed in every small American city at the point where the town stopped pretending and the highway started. The parking lot was cracked asphalt patched with newer asphalt that had itself begun to crack. The sign out front had lost the second letter of silver sometime before Sadie started working there, so it read Sliver Wheel Diner Now, which she had always thought was accidentally more honest. A sliver, a thin, sharp thing, something that got under your skin and stayed there. She had started the November night shift at 11. That was the way it always worked on Tuesdays. 11 to 7 coffee and pie and the loneliness, specific to people who needed a place to exist at 2 in the morning when nowhere else was open. Truckers mostly, a few insomniacs from the apartment complex 3 blocks over. Occasionally a young couple that had been fighting and needed neutral ground. Occasionally someone who was not eating or drinking, just sitting in a booth with their hands around a mug that had gone cold, staring at something that was not in the room. Sadie understood all of those people. She had been most of them at one point or another. She was 36 years old and she was by any reasonable measure beautiful, in a way she did not know what to do with and had never particularly trusted. Her hair was dark brown and she wore it pulled back on shift, a few strands always escaping at the sides of her face, in a way that looked deliberate but was not. Her eyes were the color of creek water, in October gray-green, clear and watchful. There was a small scar at the left corner of her mouth, a crescent-shaped thing she had gotten at 14 in circumstances she no longer explained to anyone. And it was the kind of imperfection that made the rest of her face more interesting rather than less. She was 5'6" in the diner uniform, a pale blue dress with white collar, and the name tag that said Sadie fit her the way diner uniforms fit anyone, which is to say it was designed for function and had given up on anything else. She did not own a car. She rode a bicycle to work 12 minutes each way along the shoulder of Route 62. With a headlight she had duct taped to the handlebars because the bracket had broken. In November, this meant arriving cold and damp on every shift that started after dark, which was most of them. She would lock the bicycle to the condenser unit behind the kitchen, go in through the back, wash her hands, take on her apron, and start the work of the night without ceremony. Donna Walsh, who owned the Silver Wheel and had owned it for 19 years, was 58 years old and had the manner of a woman who believed that difficulty built character and had therefore decided to be as difficult as possible for the good of everyone around her. She was not a cruel woman in the way that certain people are cruel with intent and pleasure. She was something more common and in some ways harder to name. She was a woman who had worked very hard for everything she had, who had been given very little by anyone, and who had somewhere along the way confused her own suffering with a standard that everyone else was obligated to meet. She ran a tight diner. The coffee was good. The pie was made fresh. The floors were clean. And the staff, what little of it there was, operated under the understanding that Donna Walsh's approval was not something you received, only something you failed to lose for one more day. She did not like Sadie Cross particularly. This was not based on anything Sadie had done wrong at the Silver Wheel. Sadie was reliable, was never late, rarely called in sick, had a memory for regular customers, orders that bordered on eerie, and kept her station cleaner than anyone Donna had employed in the previous decade. The dislike was based on something older and less specific. It was based on what Donna knew or thought she knew about who Sadie was before she came to work at the Silver Wheel. The application had been honest. Foster care. No permanent address until age 22. An arrest at 19 for trespassing charges dropped the kind of record that told a careful reader that someone had once been very young and very alone and had made a small and understandable mistake while surviving it. Donna Walsh was a careful reader. She had hired Sadie because no one else had applied for the night shift and the night shift needed filling. She had kept her because Sadie was the best employee she had ever had. Neither of those facts had softened the original judgment. On this particular Tuesday evening in November, the first hour of the shift had gone the way most first hours went. A trucker named Dale, who came through every week on the Portland run, ate a patty melt and drank 3 cups of coffee. A woman in her 50s sat in the corner booth and ordered pone and did not eat it, just sat with her fork resting on the edge of the plate, looking out the window at the rain-dark parking lot. 2 men from the highway crew ate burgers and talked about something that had happened on a job site in Grants Pass and laughed in the loud, unself-conscious way of men who have been outside all day and are now warm and fed. At 11:37, Sadie was carrying a coffee refill to Dale when she heard Donna's voice from behind the counter, not raised, just clipped and sharp, in the way that meant something was being communicated that went beyond the words themselves. She said, "You missed a table." Sadie set the coffee pot down. She looked at the table near the window. It had been the previous customer's table left 15 minutes ago before her shift had technically started. But that was not the kind of distinction Donna Walsh entertained. She wiped it down. She did not say anything. This was a practice she had refined over 3 years, the art of the non-response to things that did not require a response. It was a skill she had learned long before the silver wheel. She had learned it at 12 in a house in Eugene, where the rule was that a child who did not speak could not say the wrong thing. She had refined it at 14 in a house in Bend, where the same principle applied, but the consequences for violating it were more physical. By the time she was an adult, silence had become so natural to her that people sometimes forgot she was in the room, which was often exactly what she needed. She wiped the table. She went back to the counter. She poured a coffee. At 11:41, she went out the back door with a bag of trash. The rain was coming down at an angle, fine and cold, the November rain in southern Oregon that does not commit to being a proper downpour, just sits in the air and makes everything slightly wetter than it needs to be. The kitchen light cast a yellow rectangle on the wet asphalt. The dumpster was at the far end of the alley that ran behind the diner, maybe 40 feet from the door. She walked it in 8 seconds, lifted the lid, dropped the bag. The lid came down with a sound like a flat note on an old piano. That was when she saw her. The girl was sitting on the concrete step at the base of the diner's rear exterior wall in the narrow strip of overhang that kept approximately 6 inches of the step dry. She was 7 years old, maybe 8. She was wearing a lavender parka with a broken zipper that had been safety pinned at the top, pink leggings with a small tear at the knee, and sneakers with cartoon cats on the sides that had been wet long enough that the cats had begun to bleed color onto the concrete. Her backpack, covered in iron-on patches and a cluster of glittery star stickers, was held on her lap like something she was protecting. She was not crying. That was the thing. In Sadie's experience, when children were scared, they cried. When they were cold, they cried. When they were alone at night in a wet parking lot behind a highway diner, they definitely cried. This child was not crying. She was sitting very still with the stillness of a child who has decided, consciously or not, that making herself smaller and quieter is the safest available option. Her chin was down. Her hands were folded around the backpack straps. Her eyes were open, watching the middle distance, waiting for something, and the expression on her face was not fear exactly, but the place just past fear. The place where fear has been present so long that the body has found a way to carry it quietly. Sadie recognized that expression. She had worn it herself in various versions across most of her childhood. She did not move quickly. She did not call out. She walked to the edge of the overhang and crouched down slowly so that she was at the same height as the girl, and she waited for the girl to look at her. The girl looked at her. Dark eyes, a round face with a smear of dried tear track down the left cheek, old enough that the crying had happened earlier and somewhere else. A small mouth pressed into a line that was trying very hard to be composed. Sadie did not say anything immediately. She held the girl's gaze and tilted her head slightly, the way you do when you want to ask a question without words. The girl blinked. Then she said something. She said it quietly in the careful, deliberate way of a child who has been told that certain words should not be said loudly. She said, "Can I stay here for a minute, please?" Not a lost child kind of sentence. Not, "I cannot find my mom," or "I do not know where I am." "Can I stay here, please?" The please at the end carrying the specific weight of a child who has learned that please works better than nothing and has deployed it strategically. Sadie studied her. The parking lot behind the diner was empty. The highway beyond the lot made its constant low sound. The rain continued at its unhelpful angle. She reached into the front pocket of her apron and pulled out her order pad. She always had two. She tore off a clean page, took the pen from behind her ear, and wrote in clear block letters, "My name is Sadie. What is yours?" She held it out. The girl looked at the paper. Then she looked at Sadie's face. Then back at the paper. Something shifted in her expression. Something not quite relaxation, but adjacent to it. The safety pin holding her broken zipper together caught the kitchen light and threw a small point of brightness against the wall. She said, "Maya." Sadie wrote, "How long have you been out here, Maya?" The girl thought about it with the serious, concentrated look of someone doing difficult arithmetic. She said, "Since the truck stop." "I walked from there." The truck stop on Route 62 was 8/10 of a mile north. Sadie had ridden past it on her bicycle 40 minutes earlier. She did this math quickly in her head and did not let anything move on her face. She wrote, "Is your mom or dad nearby?" Maya looked at the paper for a moment. Then she looked at the parking lot in a way that was not searching. It was the opposite of searching. It was the look of a child checking whether something she did not want to see was present. She said, "My mom is coming." She said she would come. Then after a pause, she added something. She said it quieter, almost to herself. She said, "Not him, though. She is not coming with him." Sadie looked at the hospital bracelet still in her hand, the yellow plastic thing Maya had pulled from her backpack pocket. She looked at the parking lot behind the diner, empty in the rain. She looked at the child who was not lost, who had walked 8/10 of a mile in the dark to be somewhere other than where she had been. There was a difference between a child who had gotten separated from her mother and a child who had separated herself from someone else. And Sadie understood that difference in a way only certain people understand it from the inside. She had been at various points in her childhood both kinds of child. She knew the face of each. She wrote nothing for a moment. Then she wrote, "Do you have your mom's phone number?" Maya unzipped the front pocket of the backpack and removed the yellow plastic bracelet. A white paper tag was looped through it, and on the tag, in a child's careful handwriting, was a 10-digit phone number. Below the number in a different handwriting in adults were the words, "Carol Price," in case of emergency. Sadie looked at the bracelet. She looked at the girl. The hospital bracelet was not new. It was 2, maybe 3 days old, the edge of the paper tag beginning to soften from wear. She stood up slowly, pulled out her cell phone, a 6-year-old Samsung with a cracked corner of screen that did not affect the display, and dialed the number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. A woman's voice, warm and slightly breathless, asked the caller to leave a message. The voice had the quality of someone who had recorded the greeting during a good day and had not updated it since, a voice that contained energy and humor and the general forward momentum of a person who expected things to work out. Sadie said, after the tone, "My name is Sadie Cross. I am at the Silver Wheel Diner on Highway 62 in Medford. I have a little girl here named Maya who says her mom is Carol Price. She is safe. Please call this number." She hung up. She dialed again. 4 rings, voicemail. She looked at Maya, who had been watching her with an expression of focused hope. She wrote on the pad, "I left your mom a message. We will wait for her to call back. Can you come inside?" Maya looked at the back door of the diner. She looked at Sadie. She said, "Is it okay?" Sadie wrote, "I work here. It is okay." The girl stood up, held her backpack against her chest with both arms, and followed Sadie through the back door. The kitchen of the Silver Wheel was small and clean and smelled of fry oil and coffee and the industrial cleaner she had long associated with the word institutional in a way that was not unpleasant to her, because institutional had often meant warm and dry, which was already a step above several alternatives. Reuben, the night cook, was a 29-year-old man from Klamath Falls who spoke very little and cooked very well, and had never in 3 years of shared night shifts asked Sadie a single personal question, which she appreciated to a degree she had never tried to express. He was at the grill with his back to them. He glanced over his shoulder, looked at Maya, looked at Sadie, and turned back to the grill. Sadie led Maya through the kitchen and into the diner itself. The main room of the Silver Wheel held 12 tables and a counter with 7 stools. At 11:50 on a Tuesday in November, 4 of the tables were occupied. Dale, the trucker, at the counter. The woman with the pie she had not eaten in the corner. The 2 highway workers who had finished their burgers and were on their second round of coffee and apple slices. And a man Sadie did not recognize, middle-aged wire-rimmed glasses, a laptop open on the table in front of him, who had ordered a tea 40 minutes ago and had not asked for anything since. She chose the booth farthest from the door and closest to the counter where she could see the parking lot and keep her station in view. She put Maya on the inside with her back to the room. She pulled out her order pad and wrote, "Are you hungry?" Maya considered this with the brief seriousness of a child evaluating a question she had been hoping someone would ask. She said, "A little." Sadie wrote, "I am going to get you something. Wait here. Do not leave this booth." She went to the counter, wrote up a ticket herself, slid it through the kitchen window to Reuben. Grilled cheese, side of fries, cup of hot chocolate. She paid for it herself, $4.70 from the tip money in her apron pocket. She poured a glass of water and brought it back to the table. Maya drank half of it without stopping. Sadie dialed the number again. Voicemail. She stood at the edge of the booth and watched the parking lot through the rain-streaked window. The lot was mostly empty, a silver pickup she recognized as belonging to the highway workers. Dale's rig idling at the far end where the truckers parked. The condenser unit against the building wall where her bicycle was locked. Beyond that, the highway and the lights of other vehicles moving through the wet dark, none of them slowing. She dialed once more. This time, the voicemail greeting cut in after 2 rings, which meant either the phone was being actively declined or the battery was dead. She left a second message shorter. Silver Wheel Diner, Highway 62. Maya is safe. Please call. When she turned back to the booth, Maya was looking at her hands, turning them over and back the way children do when they are thinking about something that has no words yet. Then she looked up and said, "You do not talk very much." Sadie almost smiled. She wrote, "I talk plenty. I just choose carefully." Maya read this and nodded as though it were the most sensible thing she had heard in some time. Reuben put the grilled cheese up in the window with a small paper cup of ketchup that no one had asked for, but which appeared reliably alongside every plate of fries regardless, because Reuben believed in ketchup the way some men believed in precaution. Sadie brought it to the table. Maya ate with the focused efficiency of a child who was hungrier than a little. She did not inhale it the way a child who had not eaten for a long time would have, which was a thing Sadie noted and was quietly relieved by. She ate steadily, deliberately, with both hands on the sandwich. Sadie stood near the table and watched the room and tried the number one more time. She was aware in the way that a person who has spent a significant portion of their life being watched learns to be aware that the attention in the room had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was the kind of shift that happens incrementally, like a tide barely visible at any individual moment, but unmistakable when you looked at where you had started. Dale had turned on his stool so that he was facing the booth rather than the counter. The man with the laptop had not looked at his screen in 4 minutes. The woman in the corner with the untouched pie had straightened slightly, her attention no longer directed inward. The 2 highway workers were not subtle about it. One of them, a broad man with a red cap and hands that looked like they had been built for work rather than assembled, was looking at Sadie and Maya with the open expression of a man trying to determine whether something required his involvement. Sadie understood all of this. She had understood it the moment she brought Maya through the kitchen door. A woman with a scar on her lip and tips in her apron pocket, and no plausible reason that anyone in this room could identify for having a 7-year-old child eating a grilled cheese in a highway diner at midnight. She knew exactly what the room was doing with that information, and she knew that she could not stop it from doing it, only wait for it to resolve itself. She stood near the table and kept her face neutral and dialed the number for the 5th time. Donna Walsh came out of the back office at 11:58. She had been doing the weekly inventory, which she did on Tuesday nights because it was the quietest shift of the week and she could hear herself think. She was wearing a cardigan over her uniform and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she was carrying a clipboard, and she walked to the counter and set the clipboard down, and then she saw Maya. She looked at the child. She looked at Sadie. She said, "Who is that?" Sadie walked to the counter, so she was not saying this across the room. She said she was outside, in the parking lot, alone. I brought her in. I have been trying to reach her mother. Donna Walsh looked at the booth again. Maya had finished the grilled cheese and was starting on the fries in the orderly, one-at-a-time way that some children eat when they are being careful. Donna looked back at Sadie. She said, "You brought a stranger's child inside without asking me." Sadie said, "She was sitting outside in the rain at midnight. I brought her inside." Donna looked at the man with the laptop. He had his phone in his hand now, screen tilted away from her. She looked at Dale. Dale looked down at his coffee. She said to Sadie quietly but not privately, "Did you touch her?" The word touch landed in the air between them, and the air changed. Sadie said no. Donna said, "How do we know you know her? How do we know this is not something you set up?" Sadie looked at her. She said, "I will tell you what I know. I found her outside at 11:41. She had been sitting there for some time. She has her mother's phone number on a hospital bracelet. I have tried to reach her mother 5 times and left 2 voicemails. I brought her inside and bought her food from my own money because she was hungry and cold. That is what I know." Donna Walsh studied her with the expression of a woman who has just been given a reasonable account of events and has decided that its reasonableness is suspicious in itself. She looked at the clipboard in her hand as though it might tell her something useful. It did not. She set it down. She said, "I am calling the police to report a found child. That is the correct procedure." Sadie said nothing. Donna Walsh picked up the landline behind the counter. She did not dial 911. She dialed a number from memory, which meant it was a number she had called before, which meant it was not the general emergency line. She turned slightly away as it connected. She said, "Holt. This is Donna at the Silver Wheel. I have got a situation here. A woman brought in a child that might not be hers." "Yes, please, thank you." She hung up. She said to Sadie, "Deputy Riggs is on his way." Sadie looked at the booth. Maya had stopped eating. She was looking at the surface of the table, very still again, in the way she had been still on the back step. Her hands were on the table with the palms down. She had heard the name. Sadie noticed that. She went back to the table. She sat down across from Maya, which she had not done before, because she had been trying to maintain the visible posture of a diner employee rather than someone who had a personal stake in the situation. She sat down and pulled out the notepad. She wrote, "Do you know Deputy Riggs?" Maya looked at the paper. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He was at the hospital with my dad." Sadie wrote, "Your dad sent him." Maya said, "My dad is not supposed to come near us. Mom has a paper that says so." Sadie kept her face still. She wrote, "Does your mom know Deputy Riggs?" Maya shook her head. She said, "Mom does not like him. She said he is a friend of my dad's from a long time ago." Sadie folded the notepad. She put the pen behind her ear. She looked at the window. The parking lot was still empty. The highway beyond it continued to move in both directions, indifferent to the specific weight of the moment collecting inside the Silver Wheel diner. She tried Carol Price's number one more time. It rang once, twice, and on the third ring it picked up. Not to voicemail, to breathing. A woman's voice came through the line, already moving, already in motion, the way voices sound when the person is doing 2 things at once, and both of them are urgent. The woman said, do you have my daughter? Please tell me you have Maya." Sadie said, "I have her. She is safe. She is eating. We are at the Silver Wheel Diner on Highway 62. The sound that came through the phone then was not a word. It was the sound of a person who has been holding something very heavy for a long time and has just been told they can put it down. A breath going out in a rush. Something underneath it that was not quite a sob, just the physical echo of one. The woman said, "I am coming. I am in my car right now. I am 22 minutes away. Please do not let her leave with anyone. Please. I need you to hear me say that. Do not let her leave with anyone who is not me." Sadie said, "I hear you." She ended the call. She wrote on the notepad, "Your mom is coming, 22 minutes. Maya read it. Her shoulders came down. Her hands relaxed on the table surface. She picked up the cup of hot chocolate that had been sitting untouched and drank from it, and the first real expression of uncomplicated relief crossed her face, brief and bright as a match being struck. She said, "She sounds nice." The woman with the notepad. Sadie looked at her. She said, "Your mom said that." Maya said, "No. She said that about you." The door of the silver wheel opened at 12:11. Deputy Holt Riggs was 45 years old and built in the way of men who had once been athletic and had since become simply large. He wore his uniform well, the way men who value institutional authority wear uniforms, like the fabric itself confers something. His hair was dark brown, going gray at the temples, and cut short. He was not a man who looked threatening in any individual way. He looked instead like the assembled total of every small authority that had ever existed in a small Oregon town, the kind of face that had approved things and denied things and been deferred to, not because of any particular quality, but because the uniform said to defer. He stepped inside and looked around the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times: cataloged the space, identified the relevant parties. He looked at Donna Walsh behind the counter. He looked at Sadie standing near the booth. He looked at Maya in the booth. And in the first 2 seconds before he moved toward anyone, before he spoke, before he did anything that could be described as a response, he looked at the room. Not at the child who might be missing, at the room, at who was watching. The man with the laptop had his screen down. Dale was on his stool. The highway workers were looking at their table. The woman in the corner had not moved. Riggs looked at the room with the eyes of a person deciding how much of it will later need to be managed, and that look lasted no more than 3 seconds, and then it was replaced by the practiced, professional expression of a deputy responding to a reported situation, and he walked toward the counter. He did not go to Maya. Sadie stood between the counter and the booth and watched him walk past the table where a 7-year-old girl was sitting alone, and she felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the November rain she had not fully dried off from. Riggs said to Donna, "You called about a found child." Donna said, "That woman brought in a child. We do not know if she knows her." Riggs looked at Sadie. He said, "Can you tell me your name and your relationship to the child, please?" Sadie said, "My name is Sadie Cross. I am the night shift waitress here. I found her outside in the parking lot at 11:41. I have been in contact with her mother. The mother is 20 minutes out." Riggs looked at the booth. Maya was watching him. She had gone very still again. Both hands on the table, chin level, not frightened in the way a child is frightened by a stranger, frightened in the way a child is frightened by something known. Riggs said, "I know this little girl. She was reported missing from Medford General 2 hours ago." Sadie said, "Her mother is on the way. I just spoke to her." Riggs said, "I will need to take the child until the situation is assessed. Standard procedure for a missing child report." He said, "Standard procedure, the way people say words that are not meant to be examined, meant to be accepted by their authority alone." Sadie said, "Her mother said specifically that the child should not leave with anyone who is not her. I spoke to her 8 minutes ago. She is 20 minutes out." Riggs looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating to a level of resistance he had not anticipated and did not particularly welcome. He said, "I understand your concern, but I am a sworn officer of this county, and the child's welfare is my responsibility." He moved toward the booth. Sadie moved between him and the booth. She was not large. She was 5'6" and 130 pounds in her diner uniform and non-slip shoes. She was aware of how she looked in this moment, and she moved anyway. She said, "Her mother will be here in 20 minutes. The room had gone entirely quiet. Dale had turned all the way around on his stool. The man with the laptop had opened it back up, but was not looking at the screen. The highway worker in the red cap had both hands flat on the table. The woman in the corner had finally moved, sitting forward, watching. Riggs stopped. He looked at Sadie with the patient, expressionless look of a man who has decided something and is giving it a moment before proceeding. He said, "Miss, I need you to step aside." Sadie looked at Maya. Maya was looking at her. Dark eyes, round face, hands folded in her lap. Now the way she had held the backpack in the parking lot. She was not crying. She was sitting very still. And she did something small, something that required no translation. She shook her head. Not at Riggs, at Sadie. One small motion. A 7-year-old child who had walked nearly a mile in the rain, who had sat alone on a concrete step in the dark because she had judged that the dark was safer than going back, who had given her name on a piece of paper to a woman she did not know because something in that woman's stillness had told her it was the right thing to do, was shaking her head. Sadie did not move. She stood in her diner uniform with the tips in her apron pocket and the pen behind her ear and the name tag that said a name that had not been hers at birth, but had been more hers than any other name in the 36 years she had been alive, and she did not move. The rain continued outside, fine and cold and unhurried, coming down at its angle across the parking lot, where her bicycle was locked to the condenser unit, where a little girl had been sitting in the dark 40 minutes ago, where in 11 minutes a gray Honda Accord would pull in too fast, and a woman in scrubs would be out the door before it had fully stopped. None of that had happened yet. Right now, there was only the diner and the rain and the deputy and the child and the woman standing between them, and the quality of silence that settles over a room when everyone in it has just realized that something is about to matter. Riggs did not raise his voice. That was the thing about men like him. They did not need to. The authority was already in the room before they arrived, built into the badge and the uniform, and the way that small towns teach their children from a very young age to step back when a man in that shade of tan tells them to. He looked at Sadie standing between him and the booth, and he looked at her with the patience of a man who had already decided she was temporary. He said, "I am going to ask you one more time." Sadie said, "And I am going to tell you one more time that her mother is on the way." He tilted his head slightly. He said, "You want to make this difficult." She said, "I want you to wait 20 minutes. The room was so quiet that the coffee maker behind the counter, cycling through its automatic keep warm program, sounded like something mechanical clearing its throat. Dale had turned all the way around on his stool. The highway worker in the red cap had his elbows on the table. Nobody was pretending not to watch anymore. Riggs reached into the front pocket of his shirt and removed a small leather notebook. He opened it. He looked at something inside it, and then he looked at Sadie, and he said her full name. Not just Sadie, the full name. Rebecca Jean Whitmore, which was the name on her birth certificate and on her arrest record, and on every piece of official documentation that had followed her through the years, like a shadow she had not been able to outrun, even after she had stopped answering to it. He said it to the room, not just to her, the way certain people say things when they want the room to be part of the saying. He said, "Foster care, Eugene, Oregon. Medford County Juvenile Services, twice ages 14 and 16. Trespassing, Klamath Falls, 2006 charges dropped. No fixed address of record until 2011. Currently employed here, yes." The room received this information in the way rooms receive things that are delivered with the tone of confirmed facts. Nobody spoke. The man with the laptop looked down at his hands. The woman in the corner was very still. Donna Walsh was standing behind the counter with her arms crossed and the clipboard pressed against her chest, and she was looking at Sadie with an expression Sadie recognized. She had seen it on various faces in various buildings across most of her life. It was the expression of a person who has just had a suspicion confirmed and is experiencing not satisfaction exactly, but the relief of someone who no longer has to resist a conclusion they had already privately reached. Donna said Sadie. Sadie did not look away from Riggs. Donna said, "Sadie, step away from that table." Sadie said, "Her mother is 11 minutes out." Donna came around the counter. She walked to Sadie and she stood beside her, and she said it more quietly in the register that was meant to sound like a concession, but was not. She said, "This is not your business. This is a police matter now. You have done what you could do. Step back." Sadie looked at Maya. Maya had both hands in her lap. She was watching Sadie with the focused attention of a child waiting to see what the equation would resolve to. Sadie said, "She told me her mother was coming, and her mother is coming. I told her I would not leave this table until her mother got here." Donna looked at her for a moment. Then she reached out and in a motion that was more administrative than physical, removed the name tag from Sadie's uniform. The pin came free with a small sound. Donna held it. She said, "Then you are not leaving this table as my employee. You are leaving it as a customer, or you are leaving it out the front door. But either way, you are leaving it." She said it in the tone of a woman who had made a decision that she intended to stand behind, regardless of whether it survived scrutiny later. Riggs moved forward. Sadie did not move. He stopped. He looked at her. He was not a man accustomed to the specific kind of stillness she was presenting, the kind that comes not from bravado or confrontation, but from a very settled relationship with having nothing left to lose. She had stood in doorways before, smaller and younger and less certain of herself than she was now, and she had learned that the body knows things the mind cannot always articulate. And what her body knew right now, what it had known from the moment Riggs walked past Maya's table to talk to Donna first, was that the child in the booth was safer with Sadie crossed between her and this room than she was without it. She pulled out her notepad. She wrote something quickly and slid it to the edge of the table where Maya could see it without picking it up. It said, "I am still here. Do not move from this booth." Maya read it. She nodded once. Riggs said, "Miss, I am placing you on notice that if you continue to obstruct my ability to carry out my duties, I will be within my rights to remove you from the premises by force. Do you understand that?" Sadie said, "I understand you perfectly." The door opened. Not Carol Price. Too early for that. A man came in from the parking lot, 30s wool jacket damp at the shoulders, the compact energy of someone who has been out in the rain and is mildly annoyed about it. He sat down at the counter 2 stools from Dale and picked up a menu, then looked up and registered the arrangement of people in the room: the deputy, the woman in the diner uniform without a name tag, the child in the booth, the quality of suspended motion that permeated everything, and he set the menu back down. His name was Greg Tanner. He was a freelance writer who contributed to the Medford Tribune and 3 other regional outlets, and he had come in for coffee on the way back from a late assignment and had not expected this. He took out his phone and set it face down on the counter and ordered coffee from Donna, who poured it without looking at him. Riggs made a decision. He said to Sadie, "I am going to ask you to wait outside while I speak to the child." Sadie said, "I am going to decline that." He said, "That was not a request." She said, "I know." He looked at Donna. Donna looked at him. Something passed between them in the grammar of 2 people who have known each other for a long time and do not need complete sentences for certain categories of communication. Donna said, "Sadie, clean out your section and go." The room waited. Sadie looked at the booth. She looked at Maya. And then she did something that cost her more than anything she had done in the previous 45 minutes, which had already been expensive in ways that were difficult to quantify. She picked up the notepad. She tore off a page. She wrote on it and folded it once and placed it next to Maya's cup of hot chocolate. She wrote, "Your mom is on her way. The number on your bracelet. Do not leave with anyone until she walks in." She straightened. She untied her apron. She laid it on the edge of the table, folded the way she always left things when she was done with them. She looked at Maya one more time, and Maya was reading the note. And when Maya looked up, Sadie held her gaze for just a moment and moved one finger slowly toward the door, the way you would point at something you wanted a child to watch for. Maya understood. She turned to face the door. Sadie walked to the back, through the kitchen, where Reuben did not look up, past the coat hook where her jacket hung heavy canvas dark green, the shoulders already damp from the earlier trash run. She put it on. She went out the back door. The parking lot was cold and wet and empty. The rain had not changed. It was still coming in at its angle, the Oregon November rain that did not know how to hurry. Her bicycle was where she had left it, locked to the condenser unit, the headlights still duct taped to the handlebar, waiting with the patient indifference of objects. She stood in the dark with her back against the building, and she breathed. In and out slowly through her nose, the way she had learned to breathe in the years when breathing slowly was the only available tool. The cold air went into her lungs, and she let it settle there a moment before releasing it. Her hands were not shaking. She had taught them not to. She had 7 minutes before Carol Price would arrive, maybe 8. She had no authority and no uniform, and no legal standing and no recourse, and 50 cents above $4 in her apron pocket, which was now inside on a table in a diner she had just been fired from. She had a cracked cell phone. She had a green canvas jacket. She had a bicycle. And she had a number in her wallet that she had carried for 3 years without using. She took out her wallet. It was a thin thing, brown leather worn at the corners, the kind of wallet that does not expand because there is rarely enough in it to require expansion. Behind the library card and the folded-up bus schedule she kept because she still instinctively tracked escape routes, there was a small rectangle of white paper folded twice the edges, gone soft from time. She unfolded it. The number was written in blue ink in a large blocky hand, the hand of a man who did not write in small, careful letters because he had never needed to. Below the number it said, "Call if you need." 3 words, no conditions attached to them, no expiration date, just 3 words and a number and a handwriting that meant something specific about the kind of man who had written it. She dialed. It rang twice. The voice that answered was low and unhurried, the voice of a man who answers the phone the same way at noon and at midnight and at whatever hour this was, because the hour is not the point. The point is who is calling and what they need. He said, Sadie. She said, I need help. I have a little girl inside that diner who is about to be taken somewhere she should not go by a man who has no right to take her. Her mother is 8 minutes out. I got fired and put outside. I need someone to walk through that door. There was a brief silence. Not the silence of a person deciding. The silence of a person who has already decided and is simply completing the breath before speaking. He said, where? She said, Silver Wheel, Highway 62, south end of Medford. He said, sit tight. He hung up. She put the phone in her pocket. She walked to the front corner of the building where the overhang extended far enough to keep the rain off, and she stood where she could see the front door of the diner and the parking lot and the highway beyond it. She could see through the front window. The lights were bright inside. She could see the back of Maya's head in the booth, the lavender parka, the backpack on the seat beside her. She could see Riggs standing near the table. He was not sitting down. He had not sat across from Maya and spoken to her the way a person who intended to help a child would have sat across from her. He was standing. He was standing in a way that suggested he was waiting for an opportunity, not performing a duty. She watched Riggs pull out his own phone. He turned slightly away from the table when he dialed. He spoke into it briefly. Whatever he said took 11 seconds. He put the phone back in his pocket. Sadie stood in the cold and watched and felt the next few minutes arranging themselves around her, and she thought about the number of times in her life she had been in some version of this position outside a lighted building, looking in at something happening to someone inside it that she did not have the standing to stop. As a child, there had been nothing she could do with that feeling except survive it. She had spent 20 years learning what else to do with it. She heard them before she saw them. That was always the way. The sound came first, not loud, not aggressive, not the revving theatrical thunder of what people expected when they pictured motorcycles. This was something lower and more continuous, a sound that built from a single tone into a chord as more engines added themselves to it the way a river builds from tributaries. It came from the north from the direction of Highway 62, and it grew steadily for 60 seconds before the first headlight appeared around the far curve. Then the second, then 5 more, then a dozen, then a column of light that stretched back along the highway as far as she could see, each point of light belonging to a separate engine and a separate rider, the whole of it moving together through the rain with the unhurried certainty of something that cannot be redirected. 53 motorcycles. She had not counted them. She would not know the number until later when Cole told her. What she knew in the moment was that the highway in front of the Silver Wheel Diner, which had been empty and dark and moving in both directions with the indifferent traffic of a Tuesday night in November, was now occupied. The column turned into the parking lot and spread the riders, finding their positions with the practiced ease of men who had done this or something like this many times, spreading into a loose arc that curved around the front of the building without blocking the entrance, without blocking the road, without doing anything that could be described as threatening, except by someone who found the simple fact of their presence threatening, which was precisely the point. The engines cut one after another in a staggered sequence that created a diminishing wave of sound, and then the parking lot was quiet and full and dark with the shapes of 53 men sitting on 53 motorcycles in the rain, not moving, not speaking, the orange points of a few cigarettes the only color. The front door of the Silver Wheel Diner opened. Cole Donovan was 54 years old and 6 feet and 2 inches tall and 230 pounds, and he had been the president of Iron Cross MC for 11 years. He was built in a way that made architecture feel approximate. He wore a leather vest over a dark flannel shirt, his patch on the back, the Iron Cross emblem, worn smooth at the edges from years of contact with every kind of weather and road. His hair was silver gray and pulled back. His beard was the same. His hands, as he pushed open the door of the Silver Wheel Diner, were the hands of a man who had spent his adult life working with them, scarred at the knuckles and thick at the wrist, and entirely in that moment open and unhurried at his sides. He walked in. He did not look at Riggs immediately. He walked to the counter, pulled out a stool, sat down. He looked at Donna Walsh, who had gone very still behind the counter, with one hand resting on the coffee pot and her face doing something complicated that had no single name. He said, "Evening. Coffee, please." Black. Donna Walsh looked at him. She looked through the window at the parking lot. She poured the coffee. The room had changed in the way rooms change when the weight distribution shifts. Dale was on his stool watching with the expression of a man who has seen many things on many highways and is filing this in a category by itself. The highway worker in the red cap had both hands flat on the table and was very deliberately not making any sudden movements. Greg Tanner at the counter had his phone out. He was not hiding it now. Riggs had turned from the booth. He was looking at Cole with the expression of a man recalculating. Cole drank his coffee. He set the cup down. He looked at the parking lot through the window, then at Riggs with the measured, unhurried look of a man who has all the time in the world because he understands that time is currently working in his favor. He said, "I believe you have a little girl sitting in that booth whose mama has been trying to reach her for some time." His voice was low and conversational, the voice of a man making an observation rather than an accusation. Riggs said, "This is a county matter." Cole said, "I am sure it is." He took another sip of coffee. He said, "I am also sure that a woman named Carol Price is on her way here right now, and that she has a legal protective order that would be relevant to the question of who this child goes with tonight." Riggs looked at him. He said, "You have no standing here." Cole looked at the parking lot, then at Riggs. He said, "No, I just wanted some coffee." The silence in the room was a different quality now. It had weight to it, the weight of a situation in which the number of available moves had been significantly reduced without any single move having been made. Riggs looked at the booth. Maya was sitting with her hands folded on the table watching Cole Donovan with the careful attention of a child taking inventory. The front door opened. Sadie came in from the cold. She walked in the way she always walked, not hurrying, not performing anything, just moving at the pace of a woman who has decided where she is going and is going there. She was wet at the shoulders from the rain. Her green canvas jacket was dark at the collar. She walked past Riggs without looking at him, and she went to the booth, and she sat down across from Maya, and she looked at the little girl. Maya looked back at her. She said, "You came back." Sadie said, "I told you I would be here." It was the most she had said in one continuous sequence all night, and the simplicity of it. 4 words of promise kept sat in the diner air, the way simple, true things sit when they follow a long and complicated period of other things. Cole did not look at Sadie. He did not acknowledge her presence with any visible gesture. He simply finished his coffee, set the cup down, and said to Donna Walsh, "I would like another if you do not mind." Donna poured it. Her hand was not entirely steady. Riggs had taken his phone out. He was looking at the screen. Whatever he was reading on it or whatever he was calculating was taking longer than expected. He looked at the window again. 53 motorcycles in a parking lot in the rain. He had called someone after Maya. Sadie had watched him make that call. 11 seconds. Whatever instruction had come back to him through that call was now encountering the specific problem of 53 witnesses and a man who had asked for nothing more threatening than black coffee. Greg Tanner at the counter had his phone on the surface in front of him, and he was looking at it and looking at the booth and looking at the parking lot. And Sadie could see in his expression the internal negotiation of a person who came in for one thing and found another thing entirely, and is trying to decide what his responsibility to that other thing is. She did not think about him. She thought about the window. She had been watching the window since she sat down. Every car that slowed on Highway 62, every headlight that swept across the front of the building. She was watching for a gray Honda Accord, which was the car Carol Price had mentioned in passing during their conversation, had said it as she was already hanging up a detail thrown in the way people throw in details when they are already in motion, and the details are coming out of them faster than they can organize them. The Honda came in at 12:43. It came in too fast, the tires cutting through the standing water. In the parking lot entrance, the headlights swinging wide as the car corrected. It parked at an angle in the first space past the entrance, not between the lines, the kind of parking that happens when the person behind the wheel has stopped thinking about parking. The engine cut. The door opened before the car had finished rocking to a stop. Carol Price was 34 years old, and she was wearing blue scrubs under a thin jacket that was not warm enough for November in Oregon, but she had not stopped for a warmer one. She was medium height, and her hair was dark and pulled back, and she had the face of a woman who was in her ordinary life, composed and capable, the face of a hospital worker who has learned to move efficiently through other people's emergencies, but who was not moving efficiently right now because this was not other people's emergency. She stopped when she saw the motorcycles. 53 motorcycles in the Silver Wheel parking lot. Their riders still seated, still quiet, the rain coming down on all of them. She stopped for a full 3 seconds, and then she looked through the front window of the diner, and she saw the lavender parka in the booth. And she walked forward through the motorcycles the way water finds a path, not around them, through the spaces between them, and the riders on either side of her path shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, to make the path wider, and none of them said anything. She came through the door. She took 3 steps in and stopped. Maya was already moving. She had seen her mother through the window before the car had fully stopped, had been watching the window the way Sadie had told her to watch it. And when Carol came through the door, Maya was out of the booth and across the floor. And then she was not moving separately anymore because her mother was down on her knees on the linoleum. And they were the same thing, moving the same way, held by the same pair of arms. Carol Price held her daughter on the floor of the Silver Wheel Diner and made the sound that Sadie had heard through the phone in the parking lot, but which was different in person, which was always different in person. It was the sound of a person who has spent several hours in a private and unshared terror and has just been released from it all at once, and the release was not clean or quiet or contained. It filled the diner the way real things fill rooms, crowding out everything smaller. Nobody spoke. Dale at the counter was looking at his coffee. The highway worker in the red cap had his head down. Greg Tanner was very still. Cole Donovan looked at his hands wrapped around his coffee cup and said nothing. Sadie sat in the booth and looked at the window and let the moment have its proper space. Carol pulled back. She looked at Maya's face. She moved her hands over Maya's hair and her cheeks and her arms in the rapid, comprehensive way of a mother, making sure that everything is still present and intact. She said something low and fierce into her daughter's hair that Sadie could not hear. Maya nodded against her shoulder. Then Maya did something. She pulled back slightly. She turned. She looked at Sadie in the booth. She walked to Sadie first. She walked across the space between them, and she put both arms around Sadie's neck, the way children hold on to things they mean to hold on to completely, without reservation, with the full unself-conscious weight of a 7-year-old who has decided that this person is one of her people and is communicating that through the only language adequate to the feeling. Sadie sat very still. Her arms came up and she held the girl for a moment, just a moment, the way you hold something that is not yours to keep, but is yours to protect. And she felt the small, specific weight of her, the warmth of the lavender parka, the faint smell of the grilled cheese in the rain, and the smell of a child who has been scared and is now safe, which is different from any other smell in the world. Then Maya let go and went back to her mother and Carol. Price looked across the room at Sadie Cross. She stood up. She had her daughter's hand held at the wrist close. She walked towards Sadie. Her eyes were red from crying and very clear, the way eyes are after crying when the person is done with the emotional part and has moved into the afterward. She looked at Sadie the full way. Not the quick assessment, not the sweep that catches the surface and stops. She looked at the scar at the corner of the mouth and the dark eyes and the wet shoulders of the green canvas jacket and the woman sitting in the booth of a diner she had just been fired from with her hands quiet on the table. Then she reached out and she put her hand on Sadie's hand. Just her hand covering the back of Sadie's hand, a simple and direct gesture. She said you kept her safe. Sadie said she kept herself safe mostly. She made every right decision before I got there. Carol looked at Maya. Maya was leaning against her mother's side with her backpack on, already reclaimed from the booth, the star stickers catching the diner light. She said she is like that. Riggs had not moved from his position near the table. He was looking at the scene with the expression of a man whose operational window had closed without his having gone through it, and who was now recalculating what that meant for everything downstream of this moment. He looked at Cole at the counter. Cole was finishing his second coffee. He looked at the parking lot, 53 motorcycles. Carol Price looked at him. She opened the front pocket of her jacket and removed a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and held it so that it was visible. She said, I have a protective order. If you are the Deputy Riggs that my attorney has mentioned in the context of my ex-husband's prior attempts to contact my daughter, then I want to be very clear about what this document says. She said it in the voice of a woman who has spent several years being pushed and has reached the place where being pushed no longer produces the expected result. Even and quiet, and completely without give. Riggs looked at the paper. He looked at Cole. He looked at Greg Tanner, who now had his phone screen lit on the counter and was looking at it and looking at the room. He said, "Mrs. Price, I was responding to a report of a missing child." She said, "My daughter is not missing. She is standing right here." He looked around the room. The room looked back at him with the collective expression of people who have been watching something long enough to have formed a view of it and are simply waiting for it to conclude. He took his hat off. He put it back on. He said, "I am glad the situation resolved itself." He walked to the door. He opened it. The night and the rain and the 53 motorcycles were outside. He walked through them, and the riders on either side of the path made no movement and no sound, and his cruiser started and pulled out of the lot and turned south on Highway 62 and was gone. The room breathed. Cole Donovan set down his coffee cup. He reached into his vest and left a $10 bill on the counter folded once. He stood up from the stool and walked to the door and paused and looked at Sadie. He said, "You did all right." She said, "You came a long way for coffee." He almost smiled. It was the same almost smile she had seen 3 years earlier when he had shown up at the parking lot of the Klamath Falls Housing Authority at 7 in the morning with a pickup truck and 2 members of his chapter, and had helped her move everything she owned, which had fit in 3 boxes and a duffel bag, to a room in Medford that she had found online and paid the first month on by selling her last piece of jewelry. He had not asked her to explain anything that morning. He had showed up and helped her move and said good luck and left. He said it the same way now, walking toward the door. "Good luck." He went out into the rain. Through the window, she watched him walk through the motorcycles, and one by one, the engines turned over that wave of sound, building again, and the lights came on 53 pairs of headlights pointing toward the highway, and they left the way they had come in a column that turned north onto Highway 62 and disappeared around the curve, the sound of their engines diminishing in the wet air until the night was quiet again, and the Silver Wheel parking lot held only the ordinary vehicles of ordinary people, and a gray Honda Accord parked at a crooked angle in the first space past the entrance. Carol Price sat down across from Sadie in the booth. Maya was beside her, pressed into her side. The hot chocolate was cold, and Carol ordered a new one without being asked. Donna brought it without comment, which was its own kind of comment. Carol said, "She told me you wrote everything on a notepad." Sadie said, "I do not always say as much as I write." Carol said, "She said you smelled like coffee and rain." Sadie said, "That is an accurate description of most of my life." Carol looked at her for a long moment. She said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know it is not a small question, and you don't have to answer it." Sadie waited. She said, "What made you stay?" After he read your record out loud like that to the whole room. Most people would have walked away. You had every reason to walk away. Sadie looked at Maya, who had fallen slightly into her mother's side, the safety of the last hour, finally landing, her eyes beginning to go heavy at the edges. She said she was alone, and she had made every right decision. Someone needed to make sure that counted for something. Carol looked at her daughter and then at the woman across the table, and she did not say anything else for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you worked here?" Sadie said, "I did until about an hour ago." Carol looked at the counter where Donna Walsh was wiping down the surface with a cloth and not looking at the booth. She said, "I am sorry." Sadie said, "Do not be. It was a night shift." Greg Tanner was still at the counter. He had not spoken during any of the preceding activity, had sat with his coffee and his phone and watched everything with the focused attention of a person who cannot turn off the part of his brain that catalogs and files and waits to see how things resolve. He was looking at Sadie now, and she felt the look, the quality of a gaze that is deciding something. She looked at him directly. She did not look away. He did not either. He nodded once, slightly, the nod of a person acknowledging a compact that has not been stated aloud. He turned back to his coffee. He picked up his phone. He looked at it for a long moment. He put it back in his jacket pocket, face down. Maya had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, the backpack still on the star stickers catching the light, her mouth slightly open in the undefended way of a child who has released the last of the held tension and let sleep take it. Her sneakers, the cartoon cat ones, had dried unevenly, so that one cat was still visible, and one had become a pale suggestion of itself, as if it had been traveling through weather too and had arrived tired. Carol looked at her daughter sleeping and looked at the window and the wet parking lot beyond it, and she said, I have been trying to figure out how to leave him for 4 years. Every time I thought I had a way out, there was something in the way. The protective order was 6 months ago. I thought that was finally the line, you know. That was the thing that was going to hold. She paused. She said, and then tonight. Sadie said, the line held. She is right here. Carol looked at her. She said that quietly and without decoration, and it landed the way quiet, true things land without fanfare, just as weight. She said, you are going to need it. Sadie said, I will find something. Carol said, Medford General has an open housekeeping position on the night shift. I know the floor supervisor. The pay is not much, but the benefits are real, and nobody is going to read your file out loud in front of a room full of people. Sadie looked at her. Carol said, you do not have to say anything right now. I am just saying it. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and took out a card. She set it on the table between them. The card was simple name and number and title, and it had the corner bent from living in a pocket, the way useful things develop wear from being used. Sadie looked at the card. She did not pick it up yet. She let it sit between them on the table next to the cold coffee and the empty hot chocolate cup and the notepad with its pages of block-printed letters, and she let the weight of the night, the whole accumulated weight of it, settle around her, the way sediment settles at the bottom of a river after everything moving has finally slowed. Maya made a small sound in her sleep, something contented and conclusive, the sound of a child at the bottom of a dream. Sadie picked up the card. The Silver Wheel Diner looked different at 2 in the morning after everything had left it. Carol Price had taken Maya out to the Honda at 118, the girl still half asleep, the backpack riding up on her small shoulders because the straps had never been adjusted for sleeping posture. Carol had paused at the door and looked back at Sadie at the booth and said she would be in touch. Said it the way people say things they actually mean, with weight behind the words, rather than just the social form of them. Then she had taken her daughter out into the Oregon night and driven away, and the parking lot had been ordinary again. Just wet asphalt under a yellow light with a few unremarkable vehicles in the condenser unit where a bicycle was locked. Dale had paid his check and left sometime during the middle of it all, sliding off his stool and leaving exact change on the counter in the quiet way of a man who understood that this was not his story and that his continued presence in it was neither required nor appropriate. The highway workers had gone before that. The woman in the corner with the untouched pea had left her pie and a $5 bill and departed without speaking to anyone. Greg Tanner had been the last customer. He had finished his coffee and ordered another, and finished that one too, and at 1:40 he had put on his wool jacket and left a generous tip and walked to the door. He had stopped there, hand on the push bar, and looked back at Sadie in the booth, and he had said, I am going to write the real story. She had looked at him. He had said, I want you to know that, whatever you think about it. She had said, write what you saw. He had pushed through the door, and the night had taken him. Donna Walsh had moved through the subsequent quiet with the efficiency of a woman performing familiar tasks in order to have something to do with her hands. She cleared tables. She wiped down the counter. She turned the coffee maker to its overnight setting. She went to the back, and Sadie could hear the clipboard and the inventory and the sound of a woman in a room with her own thoughts, which was a sound with texture to it tonight. Reuben had put his head through the kitchen window at 1:30 and looked at Sadie in the booth and said, I saved you a plate. You should eat something. She had gone to the window and taken the plate. Scrambled eggs and toast made with more care than was strictly required by the transaction. She had eaten standing at the pass-through window, and he had not said anything else, and neither had she, and it was the most comfortable conversation she had had in the diner in 3 years. She was at the counter drinking the last of the night coffee, which was not good coffee, but was hot and present when Donna came out of the back office at 2:12. She was not carrying the clipboard anymore. She stood at the end of the counter and she looked at Sadie, and she did not say anything immediately, which was unusual because Donna Walsh generally had words ready before she needed them. She said, you still here? Sadie said, waiting for the rain to slow down before I ride home. Donna moved down the counter and refilled Sadie's cup without being asked, which in 3 years of working for her she had never done before. She set the pot down. She did not move away. She said, I have been doing this for 19 years. Sadie waited. She said, I have had 41 employees in 19 years. Some of them were here for a week, some of them for years. And in 19 years, I have never had a situation like tonight. Sadie said nothing. Donna looked at her hands on the counter. She said, when Holt called and said he was coming, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought the right thing was the procedure. Call the authority, let the authority handle it. That is what I was taught. That is what I have always done. Sadie said, most people were taught that. Donna looked at her. She said most people were not wrong in the same specific way I was wrong tonight. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan. She put Sadie's name tag on the counter between them. The pin was back in it, refastened. It sat there under the counter lights, white plastic, the name Sadie, in the small black font the uniform supplier had used for 100 identical tags across 100 identical diners on 100 identical highways. She said I should not have read what I read. Out loud, the way I read it, Sadie looked at the name tag. Donna said Holt Riggs has come in here twice a week for 11 years. I thought I knew what kind of man he was. I think I knew exactly what kind of man he was and chose not to look at it because it was easier not to look. There are people in every small town who make it easy to look the other way. He was one of those people, and I let him be. She was quiet for a moment. She said, I am not going to tell you I will never make a mistake again. I am 58 years old. I have been making mistakes for a long time. She paused. She seemed to be working through something, finding the words for it, in a place that was not the place where she usually kept her words, which was near the surface and ready. She said, but I can tell you that I will look longer before I decide. It was the thing she had come out to say. Sadie understood that. She had come out of the back office at 2 in the morning, not because the inventory required it, but because she had something to say that she had spent an hour and a half composing. And this was it, and it had cost her something to say it, and the cost was visible in the way she was holding herself upright and still like a woman who had made herself do something difficult and was standing in the aftermath of having done it. Sadie picked up the name tag. She turned it over once in her fingers. She set it back down. She said the coffee was good tonight. Donna looked at her. Something moved through her face that was not quite relief and not quite absolution. Something more complicated and more honest than either of those things. The expression of a woman who knows she was wrong and has said so and understands that saying so does not undo the wrong, but is the only available motion in the right direction. She said, come in Thursday. Your shift is still yours if you want it. Sadie said, I will think about it. She meant that she would take the job at Medford General, and she suspected that Donna Walsh understood this, and that the offer was not really about the shift, but about something else, the desire to have made a gesture toward correction, however small. Sadie understood that desire. She was not unmoved by it. She finished her coffee. She put on her green canvas jacket. She took the name tag off the counter and put it in her pocket. She went out the back door, unlocked her bicycle from the condenser unit, and rode home in the rain. The rain had slowed to the kind of thin, persistent presence that was more attitude than weather. She rode the 12 minutes along the shoulder of Route 62 with the duct-taped headlight cutting a pale path through the dark. And the night was quiet around her, the highway sparse at this hour, the trees along the road moving slightly in the wet air. She lived in a studio apartment above a tire shop on Crater Lake Avenue, which she had rented for $420 a month for 2 years. The apartment was small and kept meticulously the way people keep spaces they have chosen rather than been assigned, because the choosing matters in a way that the square footage does not. There was a bed and a table and 2 chairs and a kitchen the size of a reasonable thought, and a bathroom with a window that looked out onto the tire shop roof, where a tabby cat lived, whom she had named Grady, and who appeared when it suited him and disappeared when it did not, which she respected as a life philosophy. She leaned her bicycle against the wall inside the door and took off her wet jacket and hung it on the hook she had installed herself with a $2 anchor bolt from the hardware store 3 blocks over. She filled the kettle and put it on. She sat down at the table and put Carol Price's business card in front of her and looked at it. The name on the card was Carol A. Pricerin, Medford General Hospital Department of Nursing. There was a direct number and an email address in the kind of clean design that comes from someone who knew what they were doing. She thought about the floor supervisor Carol had mentioned. She thought about the night shift. She thought about what it would be like to work in a building where nobody knew her file, where she was just a new hire starting from the surface of things rather than from underneath them. She put the card in the small box on the shelf where she kept the things that mattered, alongside a library card and a folded bus schedule, and a photograph she did not often look at, and she made her tea and went to bed. The article ran on Thursday morning. She saw it on her phone, the link sent by Carol Price with a text that said, "Simply read this." It was in the Medford Tribune online edition, and it was long, considerably longer than the standard Tribune format for local news. Greg Tanner had written 4,000 words. He had not written about Sadie the way she had expected. She had expected to be the subject of the piece in the way people become subjects turned into a figure representing a thing, the symbol of a lesson, the illustration of a point. People with complicated histories who do good things in public tend to get that treatment. The complicated history becomes part of the machinery of the story rather than the story itself. He had not done that. He had written about what he saw. He had written about a woman standing in a diner between a child and a door. He had written about a deputy who went to the counter before he went to the child. He had written about 53 motorcycles in a parking lot in the rain, and a man who ordered black coffee and said 4 sentences and changed the temperature of an entire room. He had written about a mother on her knees on a linoleum floor. He had written about a child who walked to the woman first. He had written 1 paragraph about Sadie's history, 3 sentences placed in the middle of the piece without emphasis. Former foster care youth, has lived and worked in Medford for 3 years, works the night shift at the Silver Wheel Diner on Highway 62. That was all. No arrest record read aloud, no implied judgment in the sequencing. Just 3 sentences in the middle of a larger story that was ultimately about what had happened and who had been present and what they had done with their presence. At the end of the piece, he had written, she was asked what made her stay. After she was fired, after her record was read aloud, after every available pressure had been applied to move her out of the space between the child and the door, she said she was alone, and she had made every right decision. Someone needed to make sure that counted for something. He had attributed it directly, no paraphrase, just the words. Sadie read the paragraph twice. She set the phone down. She picked it up and read it again. Then she put the phone face down on the table and sat with her tea and let the strange, specific weight of being seen accurately settle through her, which was different from the weight of being seen inaccurately and different from the weight of not being seen at all, and which she did not have a word for because she had not had much practice with it. Carol sent her screenshots over the following 2 days. Not all of them, but a selection, the ones that seemed to say something worth saying. People shared it, people in Medford and people in other places along the highway corridor, and people in Portland, and people in towns she had never been to who had felt something about it. Some of them said things that were direct and simple, the way people speak when something has cut through the usual noise. The Iron Cross MC did not seek attention for what they had done. Cole Donovan did not give interviews. When a Tribune reporter called the number associated with the chapter to request a comment, a man who identified himself only as the chapter secretary said, "We had coffee at the Silver Wheel. Good pie. Recommend it." And that was the extent of the official statement. The comment was quoted in a follow-up piece and became somewhat improbably the most shared line of the entire affair. Sadie learned about Deputy Holt Riggs in pieces the way you learn about institutional failures through fragments and implications rather than clear direct acknowledgments. Carol told her what her attorney had confirmed. The protective order violation was being investigated. The circumstances of Maya's removal from Medford General, which had occurred without a court order or parental consent, had been referred to the county sheriff's office for review. The man whose call Riggs had made in the diner, the 11-second call she had watched him make with his back turned to Maya's table, was the attorney of record for Maya's father, which was a data point that, once placed in context with everything else, assembled itself into a picture that required no interpretation. The process would take time. These things always took time. Sadie understood that. She had spent enough of her life watching institutional processes unfold at the pace of institutional processes to have no illusions about the timeline between a referral and a consequence. But the process was moving, and it was in the hands of people whose job it was to move it, and that was more than she had had 48 hours earlier. She called Carol on Friday afternoon and accepted the introduction to the floor supervisor at Medford General. The supervisor was a woman named Ruth Ann Hogan, who had been running the overnight housekeeping staff for 14 years, and who conducted the informal phone conversation with the directness of a person who has interviewed enough people to know what she is looking for and has learned to recognize it quickly. She said, Carol says you are good with difficult situations. Sadie said I prefer simple ones, but I do not always get them. Ruth Ann Hogan said nobody does. Can you start Monday? Sadie said yes. She gave notice to Donna Walsh that afternoon, not in person, but in a note she left at the start of her Friday shift, in which Donna read before Sadie reached the end of her first hour. Donna did not say anything for most of the shift. Near the end at 6 in the morning, when the diner was quiet and the sky outside was going from black to gray, in the hesitant way it went in November, Donna came to where Sadie was resetting the sugar caddies along the counter, and she put a plain white envelope beside the nearest caddy and walked back to the kitchen. Sadie opened it. Inside was a check. It was 3 weeks of back wages she had not been paid because of a bookkeeping issue that Donna had mentioned twice, and resolved never, plus $100 in cash, folded inside a piece of silver wheel notepad paper on which Donna had written in her tight, economical handwriting, the same handwriting that had been making out checks and invoices and supply orders for 19 years for what it is worth. You did the right thing. I should have said so while it was happening. That was all. She put the cash in her pocket and the check in her wallet, and she put the note in the small box on the shelf at home next to Carol Price's business card. She started at Medford General on Monday. The work was physical and largely invisible, the kind of work that keeps institutions functioning without ever appearing in any account of how they function. She pushed a cart through corridors at 3 in the morning and emptied bins and cleaned surfaces and ran a buffing machine over floors that would be walked on all day by people who would not think about the floors. She was good at it immediately for the same reasons. She was good at everything she applied herself to seriously because she paid attention, and because she did not require external validation to maintain her standards, which meant her standards were consistent. Ruth Ann Hogan noticed on the first night. She did not say anything immediately. She watched for 3 nights the way competent supervisors watch without making it visible, and on the 4th night she stopped Sadie in the corridor near the East Wing supply closet and said, "You have done this kind of work before." Sadie said, "Different kind. Same idea." Ruth Ann looked at her for a moment. She said, "There is a senior position opening in 3 months on this floor, if you are interested." Sadie said, "Tell me more when the time comes." Ruth Ann nodded. She moved on down the corridor. Sadie moved in the other direction, and the hospital went on around her, the low sound of equipment and the occasional distant voice of the night staff, and the particular quality of silence in a building where people are sleeping in ways that are not entirely voluntary, a kind of weighted silence, a silence with stakes. She was not unhappy. This was worth noting because happiness in its absence had not always been a reliable category in her life, had often been displaced by more immediate categories like safe and warm and fed and stable. But standing in the corridor of Medford General at 4 in the morning with a mop and a cart and a paycheck coming on Friday, she was in some clean, uncomplicated way not unhappy. She thought about that sometimes during the night shifts in the way you think when the hands are occupied and the mind has its own hours. She thought about the specific shape of the life she had built from the materials available to her, which had not been the materials most people were given. She had been given instead the material of necessity, which was a rough and unforgiving fabric, but which, if you worked it long enough, became a kind of strength that did not break the way softer things broke. She thought about the woman whose name she carried. Her name, the name on her birth certificate, the name in the county files that Deputy Riggs had read aloud on a Tuesday night in November, was Rebecca Jean Whitmore. She had not gone by that name since she was 16 years old. She had left it behind in a parking lot in Portland in the winter of 1995, in circumstances that had not been of her choosing, but which in their conclusion had given her something she had not expected. She had been 16, and it had been December, and she had been 3 days out of a foster placement that had ended in a way that made the ending preferable to the continuation. She had a duffel bag with 2 changes of clothes and $43 and a bus ticket to Medford, where she knew no one but where she had found a posting for a room rental on a library board and had decided that a stranger in a new place was a better proposition than the situation she was leaving. She had been waiting at the bus station on a bench outside because the inside closed at 10, and it was 11:30 when a woman had sat down beside her. One seat over the distance that communicates awareness without intrusion. The woman was perhaps 50, with the kind of face that had lived in weather. She was wearing a green canvas jacket. She had a motorcycle parked at the curb. She sat on the bench and she did not say anything immediately. After a few minutes, she said, "You have been here a while." She did not ask about her business. She just said she had noticed. Then she said, "You're hungry." They went to a diner 2 blocks over. The woman ordered without looking at the menu, and she ordered enough food for two without asking what the girl wanted. She did not ask questions. She ate her own food and looked out the window and let the silence be what it was. When they were done, she paid the check and they walked back to the bus station. At the curb, she reached into the inside pocket of the green canvas jacket and took out a folded piece of paper and a pen. She wrote something and handed it over, a name and a phone number. She said, "If you get to where you are going and you need something in the first month, call that number. After that, you will not need it." She got on the motorcycle. She said, "My name is Sadie, in case you need to know who you are calling." She left. Rebecca Jean Whitmore had stood on the curb in Portland with a piece of paper in her hand and looked at the name on it and at the motorcycle receding into the night, and she had made a decision so quiet it barely felt like a decision at all. She found a thing that fit, and she kept it. She had never called the number because the woman had been right. By the end of the first month, she had a ball and a room and a way forward. She had kept the piece of paper anyway. She had carried the name the same way. She was thinking about this on a Wednesday night in early December, 3 weeks after the night at the Silver Wheel, standing in the hospital corridor with her card at 4 in the morning when her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was from Carol Price. The text said, "Maya has something she wants you to know. Are you at work? Can I send a voice message?" Sadie typed back, "Yes, send it." Send. The voice message was 47 seconds long. She could hear the background sounds of a house at night, the acoustic of a small room, a lamp on something quiet. Then Maya's voice, very clear with the deliberate, careful enunciation of a child who has been told she is recording something and wants to do it properly. She said, "Hi, Sadie. It is Maya. I wanted to tell you something. I got a new stuffed dog at the store with my mom. She is brown and white, and she has very soft ears. I named her Sadie. My mom said that was okay. I wanted you to know that because I thought you should know that her name is Sadie. She sleeps next to me. Okay, bye." There was a small pause at the end. Then Maya added the formality of the recording apparently concluded and her natural register reasserting itself. She says hi, too. I know that is a weird thing to say about a stuffed dog, but she does. The recording ended. Sadie stood in the corridor of Medford General at 4 in the morning and listened to it twice. She stood very still, the way she was good at standing still, with her hand around the phone and the card at her side, in the clean, empty corridor stretching in both directions, and she let the 47 seconds move through her. She thought about a stuffed dog with soft ears sleeping next to a 7-year-old girl in a room in Medford, Oregon. She thought about what it meant to name a thing after a person. The specific act of it, which was not a small act, which was in some ways the most serious act available to a 7-year-old. You named things after people who mattered. You named things after people you wanted to keep close to you in some form even when they were not present. You named things after people whose quality you wanted to have near you in the dark. She thought about the brown and white dog with the soft ears. And then she thought about a motorcycle at a curb in Portland in 1995, and a woman in a green canvas jacket and a piece of paper with a name on it. She thought about what it means to give someone a name. Not the name you are born with, but the name you are handed by a stranger who sees something in you worth naming, who trusts that you will carry it forward into a life they will never see. The woman who had sat down one seat over had given her name the same way she was receiving it now, without requiring anything in return, without conditions or expiration or a debt attached. Just a name passed from one person to another, in the dark carried forward, because it fit, because it was the right size for the person carrying it. She had carried it for 20 years. And now a 7-year-old in Medford was carrying it too, in the softest possible form on a stuffed dog with brown and white fur held close in sleep. The thing about names passed this way is that they do not stop moving. You give them thinking you are giving them to one person. You do not know that you are giving them to everyone that person will ever stand up for. She put the phone in her pocket. She pushed the cart down the corridor. She did the work. At 6:15, when the overnight shift was winding down and the day staff were beginning to move through the quarters with their morning energy, Ruth Ann Hogan found her at the supply closet and said, "I heard about what happened at the Silver Wheel. You are the woman from the article." Sadie said Greg Tanner wrote the article. Ruth Ann said he wrote about someone. That was you. Sadie put a mop head in the basin and said nothing. Ruth Ann said, I want you to know that it does not change anything about how I think about the work you are doing here. Sadie said, that is how it should be. Ruth Ann said, I know that is how it should be. I am telling you that it is. She moved on down the corridor. Sadie finished the supply closet and took the cart back to the bay and clocked out and put on her jacket, the green canvas one, and she walked out through the hospital entrance into the morning. The morning was gray and cold, and the parking lot was full of cars belonging to the day shift, practical sedans and pickup trucks, and the occasional motorcycle, the daily working vehicles of a medium-sized Oregon city going about its December. The sky was the low, flat color that meant more rain before evening. The mountains were not visible today. She unlocked her bicycle from the rack. She put her bag in the basket. She stood for a moment before getting on, just to be in the air before moving through it. She thought about the note in the box on the shelf at home, the one from Donna Walsh on the silver wheel notepad paper. I will look longer before I decide. She thought about Carol Price's card in that same box. She thought about the photograph she did not often look at, but which was there had always been there. A small square print of a woman in a green jacket on a motorcycle taken from behind. Receding, taken with a disposable camera because a teenager had wanted to remember what the back of someone's jacket looked like when they were leaving after giving you something you did not know you needed. She thought about Cole Donovan on a stool at a diner counter at 1 in the morning, ordering black coffee and saying 4 sentences that changed the weight of a room. She thought about Reuben and the plate of scrambled eggs put through a kitchen window without ceremony or explanation. She thought about Dale on his stool watching and what honest watching costs a person. She thought about Greg Tanner with his phone face down on a counter. She thought about Maya in the booth, hands folded on the table, not crying, waiting with the dignity of a child who had decided that the woman across from her was trustworthy and had staked something on that decision. She thought about what it meant to be worth that. She got on the bicycle. She rode out of the hospital parking lot and onto the road that led back through Medford toward Crater Lake Avenue, the headlight cutting through the gray morning air, the December cold coming off the asphalt in a way she felt through her jacket and did not mind. She passed the corner where the elementary school was, which would not open for another 2 hours, the playground equipment wet and empty in the early morning. She passed the tire shop whose roof was where Grady the cat lived. She turned onto Crater Lake Avenue. She locked the bicycle inside the door. She put the kettle on. She sat down at the table. She opened Carol's contact and typed a message. It said, tell Maya that her dog sounds like a very good dog and she has excellent taste in names. Tell her Sadie says hello back. She sent it. She made her tea. She sat at the table in the small apartment above the tire shop in Medford, Oregon, in the gray December morning, and she drank it while it was hot, which was a small and specific pleasure that she had learned to take seriously, the way you learn to take seriously the small pleasures that are reliably available to you because they are the ones that hold. There was a sound from above, from the roof. Grady dropping down from somewhere onto the flat section above the bathroom window doing his survey of the morning territory. She heard him cross the roof and settle. She thought about this woman on the motorcycle who had sat down 1 seat over and had not asked questions and had ordered enough food for 2 and had handed a piece of paper to a 16-year-old girl and had said, call if you need, and then had ridden away into the Portland night without ever knowing what the girl had made of the paper and the name in the meal, without knowing that the name was still moving, that it had passed through 20 years of one life and was now sleeping in the arms of a 7-year-old in a room on the other side of Oregon. Without knowing that somewhere between that bus station bench and this December morning, the name had become something large enough to stand in a doorway and refuse to move. That was the thing about what you give when you give without asking for anything back. You never know how far it goes. You never know the rooms it walks into. You never know the children it protects, or the doors it refuses to open, or the cold concrete steps it finds a lost child sitting on in the rain, and decides without ceremony, without calculation, that this is exactly the right place to stop. The tea was hot. The morning was cold. Grady settled on the roof above her. Sadie Cross drank her tea and let the day begin.